to join you today on this webinar and talk about really harnessing the power of digital media to raise awareness about culture change. And through the course of this conversation, I want to make myself available to answer any questions that you guys have about some of the social media platforms that we've been working looking for strategies to make more available to the Eden Registry Network. We will talk a little bit about the strategy that I've helped develop with Dr. Bill Thomas and the Changing Aging blog to create a multi-blog platform to empower a lot of up-and-coming organizations and folks who are interested in writing and blogging to help them harness these tools. It's something that I've been very passionate about ever since I became involved in the culture change movement. I've been very passionate about looking for ways to help all of you in this field to capture stories and tell the broader world about what culture change means to get more folks involved. So I'm very excited to be here today, and I'm looking forward to having this conversation. I'm just looking at this, and I see that potentially we might have lost Virgil. He might have dropped off here. So
Oh,
Bill,
hey, I'm back on. Sorry
I
about that.
believe Virgil was going to introduce you, the man who needs no introduction. So if you're still there, I will go ahead and Bill, have you jump on.
Okay, everybody. First off, I want to echo Kevin's comments and say thanks for being with us today. Really appreciative of the gift of your time and attention. Very much appreciating Virgil's efforts at putting this together, and I want to take a little time to kind of talk through, in particular, core simple approaches to improving your core skills as a public speaker. And while, I'm going to be using examples from the world of Eden and culture change and the world of aging services, I also want it to be clear to everybody that there's really all the skills and all the examples we're using here you can use in your career to become a better public speaker for yourself and to advance your own career. So we have kind of a two-track thing here. Number one, we are committed, as Virgil said at the top, to growing the next generation of leadership. So we know that the Eden Alternative is engaged in, I'll call it a struggle, a struggle that will extend beyond my professional career, and it's very important that the next generation of leaders be making their way forward as time unwinds. So this is a step that I'm taking to try to help push that process forward. Okay, so public speaking. Here I'm going to give you, this is Dr. Thomas's crash course in public speaking. Like what I would tell you if I was backstage with you and there were 1,000 people out there waiting for you to go on, and I had 30 minutes to talk to you, what would I tell you? Well, first things first. Public speaking, that's really kind of a misnomer in that all speaking, unless you're kind of talking to yourself or the cat, I guess, all speaking is public. You have a lifetime of experience talking to people. You've been talking to people since you were approximately 2 years old. So talking to people is something that you know very, very well. And it's actually this public speaking name that often arouses a lot of concern and anxiety among people, makes them worry about their performance. So first thing to do with public speaking is to normalize the experience. And one thing I do with an audience, whatever the size of the audience and wherever I am, is I think of the audience as a single person, and I'll explain that as I go. I want to have a conversation with a person because that's the thing I know how to do best. So if you look at my career, say 20 years, I don't know, I've given, I don't know, maybe close to 1,000 lectures, or I don't know, something like that. So maybe I have 1,000 or a few thousand hours of experience doing what we call public speaking. But look how much experience I have talking to people. I've way more experience talking to people. So I know some people recommend these things where you imagine the audience, dressed in their underwear or I don't know, other stuff. I never did any of that. I always just felt like, yes, there's people in the room, but I want to have a conversation with a person. And so it's the connection to the people that is what drives me and what I feel good about. And I think you might have even noticed when I started on this webinar, the very first thing I always do in every situation where I'm doing public speaking, is I begin by thanking the audience for their time and their attention. In today's world especially, when someone offers you their time and their attention, they're giving you the most precious gift. And I don't know, I think we're all pretty much taught if somebody gives you a precious gift, it's kind of nice to acknowledge it. So if you see me out and around, or you join me in the future doing some public speaking, there's a very high probability that I'll begin my talk by thanking the audience for time and attention, the most precious gifts. Then there's an old saying in public speaking, which I happen to agree with, and that is, from the time you begin your talk, you have 3 minutes. 3 minutes, that's 180 seconds to connect with your audience with a personal story or a personal connection of some kind. That is the essential first step. In order to escape the garbage bin as a public speaker, the first thing you have to do after thanking the audience, the first step to connecting with the audience, is sharing some kind of personal anecdote, information, relationship, connection. And actually, if you watch skillful politicians and comedians, and I guess some people are both, but if you watch them, you'll see that in the beginning of their talk, almost always, and except in the very most formal circumstances, they'll begin with, "Yes, great to be back in Des Moines. Love Des Moines, love their fried butter popsicles. They're my favorite." There's always an attempt, or needs to always be an attempt, to connect as an individual, as a human being, with the other human beings, whatever that might be. And, for me, sometimes, because from my background, I have a couple of different ways that I like to do it. Sometimes, if I'm speaking to a smaller group, I like to say, "I'm really glad I have this opportunity to join you, because I'm just going to make this into a house call where I'm going to sit down and be with you and talk with you about the kinds of things I'd love to say in the doctor's office, but there's never enough time." I want to offer the audience a place in the conversation. That's what's really happening with this beginning of this personal connection. If you've ever been in a lecture or been in a situation where the speaker's introduced and the speaker gets up and starts in on slide one and just begins their talk, it feels kind of jarring and rude, in my opinion. So far from wasting time and far from being a misuse of resources, it's actually very, very important to spend that first 3 minutes finding your connection. So sometimes when I'm sitting, waiting to go on or whatever, I'm sort of thinking about what's my connection to these people in this place? What do we share? What unites us? What can I talk about that puts us on the same side going forward? And so that's very important. The next thing I do, and I'm talking about situations where it's slightly more formal and I'm really trying to communicate specific ideas. And I know that you can buy books that say this, but I still think based on 20 years of experience, it's really important. The next thing I do is say, here's what I'm going to tell you. I do a little teaser. It's like a movie trailer of the talk. So I start, I begin with my work as a setting the stage. Here's what we're going to cover. Here's what we're going to, the background and the, now I have to say this is really weird. My doorbell is ringing. And you've all had your doorbells ring, I'm sure. Yeah, it is. Come on in, sir. So, and I am, we have I'm just going to reveal right here at this
Bring
moment.
him into the call, Bill.
We have a clogged kitchen sink, and we have guests coming tonight, so we really have to make sure that we get the kitchen sink unclogged. So
I don't know how many times this has happened to me on this stage.
Yes, the doorbell rings, and then you have to answer it. It happens all the time. So then there's, I tell people what I'm going to say, and I tell them that then I'm going to say it, and then I tell them, and then I'm going to repeat it all for you at the end. I'm going to summarize it for you. So people, I know this sounds weird, and it seems that it's as if it's negative, but it really isn't. You must decrease the amount of work the audience has to do. And good public speakers demand very little from their audience. And again, that sounds kind of weird. You'd think maybe the really good public speakers would make it, be like more challenging of their audience. And what I mean is that actually good public speakers make it easy. And over the years, this has even changed how I speak, and it's changed my voice. And I didn't really understand this till I started traveling overseas. And I would give lectures, especially in Europe, to people who were not native English speakers. They, would speak English, but and pretty uniformly, after I came off the stage, people would say, wow, okay, we could understand you. That was good. Because sometimes we have Americans over here, and they're just hard to follow, and they're hard to understand. So if you notice, and this may become annoying if you notice it, but if you notice, I tend to say one word at a time, and I tend to say the whole word. Here is where some public speakers have a problem. They talk really fast like this, and they don't actually really finish the words that they're saying. And they either they're talking fast or slow. If you don't enunciate and you don't speak clearly, then the audience has to put more effort into paying attention to you. And sooner or later, some of them are going to get tired and they're going to stop listening. So over the years, I think the audience has trained me to try to speak clearly when I'm trying to communicate. This also applies, to webinars and group phone calls and so on, where a voice that is does not require people to pay a lot of attention to is actually easier to follow. All right. Now, that's the old, I've said, I'm going to tell you what I'm going to tell you, I'm going to tell it to you, and then I'm going to repeat it for you. So the other thing I try to do in any speech that I give is I attempt to the best of my ability to limit the number of points I'm making to 3 points. 1, 2, 3. And one of the tests I often use with the audience, and I know there's people on this call who have heard me do this, which is I'll often say to the audience, if you go home tonight and you are sitting at your kitchen table and people say to you, what'd you do today? And you say, oh, I went to a lecture by Dr. Thomas. Here's what you tell them you learned. In other words, I want to give people the ability to hold on to my lecture after it's over. So sometimes I'll even sort of dramatize, if somebody asks you, so what did he talk about? Tell them these 3 things. This is what he talked about. And rehearsing that for the audience up front really is fun and helpful. And I don't have any science behind this, but I sort of believe that it actually helps people grab the takeaways of my speech and hold on to them a little better. Next point I want to make about this, and this is sort of Tradecraft 101, but I think for me, it's important. I never distribute handouts of any kind before I'm speaking or while I'm speaking. You have enough competition with people's phones and the newspaper and whatever other stuff they already have. You do not need to increase the competition for attention by giving them more at the beginning. So if I have handouts or I use any kind of handout material, that's always distributed at the end. Personally, I don't use PowerPoint as part of my lectures, and that's not, some people do use them, and I think it's fine. I think it could go either way. But here's a law I would like to pass if I was president and sign. If you use PowerPoint for a public speech, they'll come and arrest you if you read off that slide. Do you hear me? If you get caught reading off that slide, they're coming. They're going to cuff you, and they're going to put you in the back of the cruiser, and you're going downtown. And then they're gonna be like bringing you in front of the judge. Yes, reading off the PowerPoint slide. And the judge is gonna be like tisk, tisk, tisk. Okay. If you use visuals and if you use text on PowerPoint, you are not allowed to read what's on the slide. And here's why. Among the audiences that we are likely to find ourselves in front of, the literacy rate approaches, well, it's in the high 90s. It's close to 100%. So everyone in that audience can read. And they didn't come and they didn't put their butts in the seats to have you read to them. So you can use PowerPoint. You can use visuals, you can use photos, you can use clips of video, all good. Just not allowed to read off the slides. And I happen to know that there are people on this call who I will someday be in the audience and I will be watching. And I just know that you're not going to do that because we shared this hour together in the middle of December in 2014. Okay, next thing. To make your point, it is incredibly valuable to be able to tell a story. Now, here again is good news. You've been telling stories since you were approximately 2 years old. You have told in your lifetime tens of thousands of stories. You tell stories all the time. I even sort of got off on a little story with that idea of being president and passing the law, and then you got arrested, and then the judge was just fisking. So telling stories is really native to our species. You are a storyteller. You already have that title. So the question is, how do you become a better storyteller? And there are a couple of things about storytelling in the body of your speech that I think are important. First off, the story absolutely needs to be simple. Complicated, again, you can't tell complicated stories because they demand too much from an audience. It has a lot of competing places to turn their attention. So stories need to be simple, and they can be simple and simplified, and they need to make the point that you're discussing so that you can be talking about something, flip to the story, and then come back from the story, and you're right on the same path. So I think we've all seen speakers in a variety of settings that use stories, but the stories don't connect to what else is going on, and you just wind up scratching your head and saying, what was that all about? If you want to be a better storyteller, I know of no better advice than to go to the library or the bookstore and buy a good edition of Aesop's Fables. Aesop's Fables. If you're lucky enough to have a juvenile, a child, I would say basically between 4 and 14, somewhere in there, access to a child in that age range, and you have Aesop's Fables, you can practice for hours and hours reading Aesop's Fables to the kids. And what makes them so wonderful is every one of those stories is just sharpened down to a needle point. If you look at those Aesop Fables, there is not one extra word. There's not one extra character. There's not one extra scene. There are none of them wander off and then come back to the point. They're all really direct. They're really powerful. And what's fun about reading them to kids is that you can experiment with your voice. So I was mentioning earlier about enunciation. Well, I find to the degree that it's comfortable for you, and this is a matter of personal taste and choice, to the degree that it's comfortable for you, you have an opportunity to use your voice in novel ways when you're speaking in public. And again, I think some people on this call have heard me tell, for example, Khalid the Kind, and the sound effects that I do with it. You can practice sound effects and voices with the Aesop's Fables, and the kids will be totally cool with it. You can try anything. They don't care. They'll think it's fun. In fact, I have to say, I remember when I was reading to my own kids when they were younger, sometimes just for fun, I would start reading in a sort of a blank voice without inflection or without sound effects or characters. And my kids would be like, Dad, stop that. Do it right. And for them, doing it right actually meant, doing it right really meant being in making use of characterization and using character and voice and sound effects to help me tell the story. One last thing about storytelling in brief that, again, I found very helpful. Don't hesitate to make use of pauses. Don't hesitate to change the rate of your speech. Don't hesitate to change the volume of your speech. There's room for emptiness. there's room for the audience to think for themselves. Pauses like this actually indicate confidence on the part of the speaker, not uncertainty. So you can let a pause linger, and in doing so, reinforce your point. Now, I've been doing this for a long time, and I knew where I was going. And if you noticed, before I started that slow part with the pauses in it, I increased my rate of speech and I put everything together, and I was like, so you have available to you rate of speech, volume, pauses, emphasis created through repetition. Those are the basic building blocks, and they're all there for you. And what's great about Aesop's fables is that Aesop's fables let you experiment with all those things, and it's 100% safe. And kids love it. And you just practice with them, and pretty soon you'll find that you can use the same tools in your public speaking. Now I'm going to move here to the how I like to conclude talks that I give. If you study this thing formally, and I don't think there's any reason why you would have to, but if you did, you'd know that in classical public speaking, there's something called the peroration. Peroration. And if you ever watched a really good public speaker, they use peroration all the time. In the peroration, you've sort of begun your speech, you've given the body of your speech, and then it's almost like you create a dividing line where you're now into the end of the speech, and people understand that you're into the end of the speech. I'll put this in movie terms, and in storytelling and movies, they use different terminology, but you know that after all of the explosions happen in the movie, you know that there is still more movie to come, where the characters are all kind of set up and ready for a new, where the story is going to take them. And this is what happens, I have to say, this is what also happens in our public speaking. We have an obligation to bring our audience to this next place. You can't just stop the talk at the end of your content. Oh, last slide. Are there any questions? No, no questions. Thank you very much. That's not how we roll. What we do when we're closing up a speech, for example, say you're using visual aids like a PowerPoint. You step away from the PowerPoint, or you just put a very simple slide up and just step away from it and address the audience directly. And what you're saying to them is, you've been with me, I've taken you through this material, now it's just us. The material's over there, but now it's between us. And at the end, you have to connect the stuff you've been talking about to the lives of the people in the audience. You have to close the sale. Just presenting them with data and anecdotes and graphs and pictures, that's necessary but not sufficient. You also have to close the sale. And by closing the sale, I mean What I mean by closing the sale means give them a reason to make use of the ideas that you're talking about. Think about it, a big conference and wherever you have a chance to give a talk, and there are lots of speakers there. There are lots of ideas there. Why should they take your ideas back with them and put those ideas, integrate those ideas into their lives and into their work and into their communities? This is really important, and it's a distinct part of the speech. And it's really telling, because if you can't make a compelling case of why these ideas are important and should be taken away, then you're giving the wrong speech. Because you shouldn't be wasting people's time if you can't answer that question. And, again, we've all been in audiences where people have wasted our time. They've told us a whole bunch of stuff, all of which was true and none of which mattered to us. And we have important work to do, and we can't afford that kind of wastefulness in our work. So lastly, I have a couple of things I want to say about questions and answers. And then, we're going to go to question and answers. And Kaven's on tap for his expertise on social media, and I'm on tap for public speaking. And we all share the goal of helping grow a new generation of leaders for Eden. So, questions and answers. Questions and answers, as they are typically done in American society, are biased toward extroverts. And if you've ever done Q&A, you know what I mean. There's somebody in the audience who's been dying to answer or ask a question out loud in front of everybody since the first 3 minutes of your speech. Okay? They have been eager to raise their hand and jump up and ask their question. And extroverts are really good at that. And they're often really cool, fun, great people, extroverts, and they frequently have good questions. However, there's a whole bunch of people in your audience who are introverts, and the introverts don't stand a chance. They don't ask questions in front of a bunch of other people, and so we miss out on their wisdom, and we miss out at understanding what their concerns are. So what I do when I have a smaller group, let's say 50 and under, is I'll often ask people to, and if I have the time, I'll ask people to write down their question on a piece of paper. And then we collect all the pieces of paper, and I run through the questions quickly, because I can take all that time that would have gone into listening to the extroverts ask their questions, and I can put it into giving answers to the best of my ability. The questions also often, because they're anonymous and they're written, they touch upon the unspoken concerns that are in the room, but nobody is going to allow, I guess I would say, those things to be spoken aloud, but people will write them down. One of my favorites is to talk to people in long-term care settings and do the written questions and have somebody, I don't know who, write down, what do you do when management thinks they get it, but they really don't get it? Now, you're not going to get that question spoken aloud, but man, is it valuable when that kind of question is written and you can read it and then do your best to answer it. In much larger groups, I would say over 150, I tend not to do Q&A very much with them, just because then only the extreme extroverts are willing to ask questions, and everybody else, you have to get the microphone over there, and everybody else will go on, and it just doesn't. The bigger the group, the less Q&A works for me. So that's how I've evolved over time to try to do that. What I sometimes have done in place of Q&A is invite people to, come into small groups and have a group discussion about what I'm talking about, so they get to verbalize some of the ideas right on the spot. That's helpful, and sometimes even more helpful than Q&A. So I think the last thing I said that was the last thing. This is the last thing. Ah, ah, ah. The last thing is don't be afraid. You're already a great public speaker. You've been a great public speaker your whole life. You just need a little practice with this particular type of public speaking. And as I found, as long as I was talking about something I really believed in, then the audience wants me to be successful. They want me to do a good job, and that helps so much. So, with that little brief dip into the pool of public speaking, I'm going to sort of throw the mantle of this back over to Virgil Thomas and Kevin Peterson. And I'm sure you have technology for Q&A in this environment. And I'm really hoping we get to have some Q&A and I can do the best, and Kevin can do the best he can, and Virgil can do the best he can to answer some questions.
Great, thank you. So I hope all of you are somewhat familiar with GoToMeeting. The way we'll do it now, because we do have a pretty big group, is you can type it into your questions into the questions box. It's about middle range there, and as they come up, we'll kind of pass around to whoever's going to answer the question, and then we'll have a discussion about it.
And I'll just jump in briefly while folks are thinking about their questions and the introverts are composing their questions for us. One of the things I'm excited about in this world is kind of marrying the digital and the analog. And it's incredible to hear from a master like Dr. Bill Thomas to talk about the craft of public speaking. And I learn something every time I listen to him, and I learned even more by having him explain his strategies. And one of the ways I just want to introduce the idea of bringing together the sort of public, face-to-face ways that we can spread this message, public speaking, with the digital ways, the way we can leverage and harness those tools, is just to point out that one of the strategies that I always talk about for writing, because I feel like there's also an intimidation that people have for writing something that's going to appear in front of potentially thousands of people, similar to public speaking. And I find that it is extremely helpful to take all of the lessons that you just heard from Dr. Thomas and apply them to your writing. We are looking for writing and blog posts that are very approachable, that really connect to people. And so I would encourage you to think about the stories that you would tell if you're giving a public speech as stories you could potentially tell through some of our digital platforms. And also one tip that I would add that I think crosses over through both of these is when you are looking to write something, and if you are new to writing and find it very intimidating, one of the basic tips that I always give is to read aloud your ideas for your story. Don't worry about the composition, don't worry about the grammar, don't worry about the how to organize it. Write out your ideas and read it aloud. And you will find that if you can use your natural given skill to have a conversation and compose your thoughts like you would a conversation, you'll be very successful in writing down your thoughts to tell a story online. That was the one thing I wanted to add, Virgil. You want to go ahead with the Q&A?
Yeah, we can get started with that. The one thing that I want to kind of add in there, and from my perspective, is that all of these are important, every level, whether you're writing or public speaking. Your public speaking will help your writing, and your writing will help your public speaking. And all it is just learning the language of that little area. But the skills are transferable. So the wider net you cast, the more practice you get, whether it's um, participating on your Facebook page or reading Aesop's fables or doing talks or lectures or what have you. All of it contributes to your practice and your skill level. So that's why we like to try and get people engaged as even just a little bit, because every little bit counts. So we have We have a question here from Amy. I hope you don't mind, I just said your name. Is it okay to write down the story, but not necessarily read it, but have it in front of you? So I think,
Actually, I'll
yeah, go
jump
ahead.
in if you don't mind. I'll jump in on that. Just so here's the funny thing about stories. Um, what I would suggest instead of writing out the story and having it in front of you is to write, because the note cues can be valuable, especially if you're new to the game, so to speak. So I would write down, for example, I tell a story called Khalid the Kind, and if I were to have that on a little note card, I would be like, traveler leaves home, storm comes, traveler found by Khalid, traveler drowns, conclusion. You know, that a little thing like that could help me stay on track, whereas a long written out description would tempt me to, my eye can't find the clue fast enough, so I'd be really kind of tempted to read it. But lots of people use, for their notes, when they're in a phase where that's helpful to them, they just use little brief phrases or a couple of words just to help them find the next chunk of the story or the next chunk of the speech. So that's a tip for doing it extemporaneously. Just write down these chunks, and then actually you do it 2-3 times, and you find out you don't need the card anymore because you remember the chunks of the story.
Right. Great. We have another question here. Do you think it's a good idea to have handouts available at the back of the room that people can pick up as they leave, as a way to keep ideas alive and possibly to further development for people down the road? Is it also beneficial to have handouts, quote unquote, online?
Well, let me do the live thing, and I'll let Taven do the online thing. As I said in the talk, I don't like handing things out to people during the talk, or before or during, because I think it's distracting. However, during my last part, my peroration, I could easily say something like, I put together some notes for you that will offer you, real everything I've been talking about might be really helpful or useful to you, and they're available on the back table. You can pick them up on your way out, or arrange to have them handed out at the end of the speech. But to call for the speaker to say, I prepared this for you, is really almost a different message than, are there handouts for the speech? It implies a gift. And most people, most of the time, will not decline gifts. In our culture, we're supposed to accept gifts gracefully. So sometimes you can frame the handouts as a gift from the speaker to the audience that were, prepared with care, so to be helpful. Kevin, online, what's happening online with this sort of stuff?
So I would add, I draw a distinction between presenting at a conference in an environment where people are really there to learn. They expect to have some material to take home. A lot of times conference materials are posted online, central area where people can go back and get them. And that's fantastic. It can be useful, and make things more accessible to folks. What I would like to just emphasize for this conversation is, hopefully you guys are looking for opportunities to speak at conferences and spread the message. But it would be incredible to look for other opportunities to reach new audiences, especially in your communities. And in that case, both professionally and for culture change, I would emphasize thinking about having a platform, a website, so that folks, after they have seen you speak, and if they are really interested in what you had to say and they're interested in learning more, there's a place for them to come and not just find information, but to get engaged and join the conversation. And so talking about the Eden Alternative and culture change, we've worked really hard to create the Eden Alternative website, which is actually about to be a totally new design, is about to be unveiled, with new opportunities for folks to have conversation with us via social channels on the blog, Facebook, and Twitter. So I would hope that everybody on this call who has the opportunity to speak is thinking about ways that the audience can connect with them afterwards, and continue the conversation, because you can't have a one-on-one conversation with everybody in the room, but you can have everybody in the room connect with the movement and communicate with the movement.
All right. Um, I just had we have another question that came up. So some people were wondering if you could summarize this presentation in three main points. What would they be?
I love that. I love it. Three main points. Be confident, practice, teach.
That's awesome. So I had a question, if you don't mind.
Hit it.
Me jumping in. So I've often found, in my personal experience, that I've gone both routes: the totally extemporaneous, just trying to think, talk out of my head, and then writing down the prepared speech. So, what level of preparation do you recommend for people to? Is it worth writing out a whole speech just so that you've practiced saying those things out loud, or is it best to do bullet points? How exactly? What preparation would you recommend for people?
Well, I think that this is we can actually touch on person-centeredness here, and I think people vary. Um, I will tell you, it is very, very difficult. It takes years of practice to deliver a written speech in a lively, personal way. I mean, that's a hard thing to do. It's actually much harder than speaking extemporaneously. So the fully written out speech, I think, takes so much time to make it look good on paper that you're robbing yourself of the time you need to practice it. So I'm a big favor of sort of a middle route, which are either note cards or a slip of paper or some kind of cueing thing that just gives you the chunks of the speech, you know, um, uh, so that you don't get lost in the speech, but you're not rehearsing exact lines and exact turns of phrase, which that's just another level professionally to be able to do that really well. Your thought, Kevin?
Yeah, I'm a hardcore introvert. I'm very introverted, and even though I have extensive experience speaking publicly, appearing on radio, TV, it always terrifies me, and it never fails to terrify me. Um, the method that I found most helpful, also, was not to fully draft a fully prepared speech and memorize it, but I create outlines and then I record myself. And I don't do this as often as I used to, but when I was young and appearing uh, on media, I found that to be most helpful, to record myself practicing my speech, and that time it took to deliver the speech was much more beneficial than trying to memorize and write. Um, but everybody is different and is going to need a different technique. And I just think the number one rule is to practice speaking out loud.
Yeah, that's. We got one more question, guys. If I think, and then we'll be about out of time. So, if you have any more questions, get them in now. Um, what do you think the best way to get the word out about websites/blogs would be, uh, or you find to
During a
help others
speech.
find and use them?
Hmm. I mean, I'll tackle that. That's a broad question. It's very helpful to remember during your speech, to mention kind of a central place to go for information. You don't need to rattle off your Facebook page or Twitter account. Just it's helpful if you have, go to this website, and on your materials have, the main website. There is a whole strategy that I take approaching social media, where you have all these channels, and one way I try to grapple with that and centralize it is to have a strategy where I am syndicating content through my channels, but I have a focused kind of central system of syndication through the main website, so information is pushed out through the website.
Yeah, I happen to agree. From our end, what we try to do is have a person could go to various platforms and not only get a lot of good information about the Eden alternative, but be shepherded to the website from those platforms. So if you cast a wide net and you are diligent about it, making sure the connections are there and everything is up to date, that's a really good strategy. So our one of our last questions here, do you have advice on getting back to your topic if you find that you've lost focus or drifted?
That's
And
a
I think
good
this is one of the
question.
best questions. Yeah.
That'll
Yeah,
help us.
actually, yeah. So here is a good way to do that. You've wandered off, you got lost. Ironically, it's great to admit that to the audience, and you can just say, "Oh, I'm so hyped up about this. I've gotten a little off track. Let's bring it all right back where we need to be." In other words, the audience, they think you're brave to get up there in the first place, and they want you to succeed, and they are willing to cut you a lot of slack, especially if you have even a smidgen of humility. So admitting that you've gotten off track, admitting that you've wandered away, and then just putting that into play with the audience and saying, so let's get back on track. Let's restart. And they will more than 9 times out of 10, they'll gladly give you that opportunity to restart and think a lot more of you because you were willing to admit that you were kind of getting a little lost.
Great. So, do you have anything? We're about to be done here. Do you have anything, guys, that you want to add?
I have something for the people still on the line. If you're not following me on Twitter yet, at Dr. Bill Thomas, follow me on Twitter. It's really fun, conversational, and I see the Twitter page there. I do all different kinds of social media, but this is really my favorite type of medium. I really like it, and so follow me on Twitter. It'd be fun. I'd love to have you. Okay?
Great. Thank you so much. The last thing that I'm going to put out to everyone here is I'm going to reach out after this webinar just to sort of talk to everyone, kind of get your feedback on it. And starting in January, we're going to be revamping this social advocate program. And if this is something you're interested in, if you want to learn to be a better speaker or a better writer, we have lots of opportunities to teach you how to speak the language of social media, um, how to write. We have a guest blogger program through Changing Aging and Eden Alt, and eventually, if you'd like to create your own platform, Caven and I have a process for doing that. So I will reach out. I'll kind of take your temperature, and if this is something you're interested in, great, we can go forward from there. And if not, there's absolutely no stress. But we thank you so much for attending anyway.
Yes. Thank you very much, everybody.
Yep. Thanks, everybody. And thanks to Virgil Thomas for organizing it. Great job. Okay?
Thank you.
Yep. Bye-bye.